James, thank you so much for joining us. So, you are a very experienced, well rounded risk professional. So, tell me how you have seen the dynamics with third party risk change in the context of the wider risk landscape.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Carla. I think it's kind of cliche for people to say COVID has changed everything. But I was looking at my calendar. The last time you and I spoke was June of 2020, which feels like a lifetime ago. And
Yeah.
a lot of things around supply chain and vendor risk management really have changed. And when I speak to organizations, board of directors, executive management, I really feel like cybersecurity is the most challenging risk that organizations face today, but supply chain and vendor risk is the most complicated. It's a really messy area of risk management. Most organizations don't even have a good handle on their first level vendors. But when you get to those second or third levels, it's like a black hole where people have no idea what's going on. And I think organizations are really going to struggle with that over the next 12 months because it's going to continue to burn them.
You're so right. And I think with the Kaseya breach, that's the thing that no one's really focused on, that actually this was for many a fourth party breach, one of the first fourth party breaches we've seen. And organizations don't have a handle on their third parties, let alone their fourth and fifth. So, what are you seeing from organizations that are getting this right? What are they doing differently?
I'm going to be honest, I've seen very few organizations get this right. So the first thing that organizations get right is, are you even looking at your first level vendors? And there's some simple things that all organizations can do. So for example, most companies with a vendor, you have an SLA, but are there financial teeth behind that SLA? So I was working with one organization because of a vendor outage. They lost $5 million. And the penalty from the vendor was $2,000. So who cares? The vendor had no incentive to prioritize restoring that client because there wasn't a cost there. The second easy thing I see, and I think this has become more prevalent again since COVID, is that force majeure language that you have in a contract with a vendor. What allows them, act of God, what allows them to get out of a contract or get out of SLAs for free? And a lot of organizations, that force majeure is so wide breaching, it's anything. Organizations can really make sure to tighten up that language, that it is true act of God and not just anything that the vendor can invoke because they're in trouble. Another thing, obviously I started in business continuity, so I'm always thinking about business continuity. You're seeing more organizations get burned by their vendors' business continuity interruptions. So are you even aware, does your vendor even have a business continuity program? Can you even see their business continuity plans, their test results, like really measuring their risk? I was reading an interesting report last month in Teros. They do an annual global supply chain report. And there was like 900 respondents and 83% said that they had a supply chain disruption because their supplier had a business continuity incident, experienced a disaster. So I think that bright line between supply chain, vendor risk management, and business continuity really need to blur for organizations to be effective. And then to your point, how do we get to third or fourth level risk management? I think we have to start with that first level and push our vendors to push their vendors, because that breach that you mentioned, that's going to continue to happen. And a lot of the organizations that I work with that are managing a breach from a crisis management standpoint, it started up the chain. Those are far more common than I think people want to talk about or admit. They just don't get publicized. But you're going to see more and more sophisticated threat actors. You're going to attack the weakest link in a chain. And so if you're a major company who has a major supplier who has a minor vendor, and you and I were threat actors, where would we focus our time and attention? We would focus on that little company and just work to exploit the chain backwards.
Absolutely. And I think, we're seeing so much more of the attacks that we see, they're coming through the supply chain. Do you feel that businesses understand that, or is there still an education piece to do on that?
I would say that this year now businesses understand that, because two things. Again, if you look at COVID, it first started as a supply chain disruption. You had manufacturing sites in Wuhan, China, and Northern Italy shutting down. And the first organizations that were aware of that before it became a pandemic were thinking, hey, 30, 60, 90 days out, I'm going to have key components or supplies running out. So I think there was a level of awareness there. Certainly the Suez Canal, the whole world that, brought everyone's attention to the fact that we magically had a ship stuck sideways in the Suez Canal, and $10 billion US a day in the supply chain was impacted. That woke a lot of companies up, and you're seeing a lot of electronic companies struggle now with chip manufacturing. Over the last few years, these chip manufacturers have consolidated for efficiency sake, but those factories already run at 24/7, 365, 90, 95% increase for chips. Everyone was trying to find a Nintendo Switch or new TVs last year. They couldn't. Those factories take a few years to build. That's a supply chain problem that's not going to be solved today. So I think between COVID and the Suez Canal and the chip shortage, I think that's kind of jumped supply chain management into a bigger stream of consciousness. I liken it to the Target breach, right? There was breaches happening and hacks happening before Target, but especially in the United States, the Target breach, I think, really brought it into the mainstream for consumers and also for executives and boards. And for me, that's when companies started to really take cybersecurity focus on it more. And I'm starting to see that supply chain vendor risk management is something that's more top of mind with executives, more so than it's ever been in my career.
And of course, Target was a supply chain breach. So are you seeing people group the cyber risk with general risk in their third-party teams, or are you seeing that being separated out? What's the most pressing risk for supply chain teams?
I think for most organizations, it's still separate. And I don't think that's a good idea, because when we segment risk management and we're trying to decide, is this a cyber incident? Is this a business continuity incident? Is this an EH&S incident? You're not responding to the incident. You're not mitigating risk at the enterprise level. So for me, the companies that I think are the most sophisticated right now in risk management are saying, hey, at an enterprise level, we have risk. Could be cyber, could be pandemic, could be whatever. How do we manage that holistically across the organization?
And what do you think is going to happen over the next year or so? Do you think we're going to see a big increase in people taking this risk seriously and progressing their programs, maturing their programs?
I think there are, for two reasons. One, again, after COVID, very similar to just after 9/11 or just after Sarbanes-Oxley was a result of WorldCom. The first thing you always seem to have after something that changes things is you have regulatory requirements. That's not the best way to increase change, but it does seem to follow regulatory requirements. And then, but more importantly for me, companies are losing money when these interruptions happen. And that really drives change in private organizations more than anything. They say, hey, we had a breach, we lost money. We had a supplier go down, we lost money. We can't afford to do that. And it's going to be top of mind for a lot of organizations that, you hear the old adage, follow the money. And I think a lot of organizations will continue to do that. Is what risk do we need to mitigate that has the biggest impact to revenue?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I think that's a really interesting perspective and enjoy talking to you.
Thanks, Karla.